So before I start, I'm fairly certain that this is the video no one wants to see. I'm fairly certain nobody gives a damn about Ja Ja Rule, Lizard McBatty, the Blue Meanie, Zoraal Ja. But the truth is, this entire thing has been stuck in my head for months now. If I don't make this video, it's gonna drive me insane. With that said, let's talk villains. Let's talk kings and succession. Let's talk Zoraal Ja. The latest expansion for Final Fantasy XIV, Dawntrail, introduced a new continent, a whole new set of mysteries, and of course, new villains, such as Fiend, the Queen of Alexandria, and Zoraal Ja, aka Jafar Ja, the main antagonist in the Alliance raid. But the one I'm interested in is the King of Resolve, aka the Warrior King of Alexandria, and the brother of Wuklamat and Kona, Zoraal Ja. A character that, to me, seems slightly misunderstood. Not that he's not a villain, but in terms of the depths of his character and his motivations, as well as his reactions in certain scenes. Now, this could be just my perception of things, but hey, my channel, my rules, my obsessive need to study things. Do be aware, a lot of this is speculation, so I prefer to think of it as educated guesswork. To make it easier to convey some of the points I want to make, I'll be using terms based on the Japanese script rather than localizations. So instead of promises, vows, and even dawn servants, we're talking kings and princes. It's far easier for everybody involved. As a quick recap, Zoraal Ja is the first prince, Kona is the second, and Wuklamat is the first princess. And their dads are the Warrior King and the King of Reason. The villains in Final Fantasy XIV are, curiously, some of the most beloved characters in the game. They're the subject of many conversations, and at times they drive the story forward even more than the cast of supporting characters for the Warrior of Light. And Metzelk stands chief among them. His motivations clear and his charisma, making him an outstanding character, especially as we can empathize with his situation, with his grief, even if his solution to commit genocide at an interdimensional level to fulfill his goal of reuniting with those he lost might be a bit much, but just a tad. Love or hate him, Xenos Ye Galvas is another notorious character in the halls of villainhood for FF14, though he is, in all ways, a much simpler and direct character. A sociopath whose only joy in life is found in the battlefield, and who becomes enamored with the Warrior of Light as someone who can actually stand in his way, actually offer him the life and death struggle he seeks. Xenos is refreshingly direct, and his lack of care for reasons or morality is kind of fun. But the thing they have in common, and which Zoraal Ja shares, is obsession. Every villain in 14 is obsessed with whatever their pursuit might be. For example, Metzelk is obsessed with reclaiming his lost world, to the point where those in the new world he doesn't even see as people, just fragments of those that came before, less than the whole, broken things that should be mended. Zoraal Ja too has an all-consuming obsession, and it's closer to home, relating to his relationship with his family, more specifically his father, driven to prove some form of superiority, to live up to impossible expectations. What makes them different though is that for all the other villains, by the time you face them, you know every aspect of their psyche. You know what makes them tick, their goals and motivations, with several moments dedicated to teaching you about that, to showing you who they are. For Zoraal Ja, on the other hand, we know his aim, world peace through conquest, which is a tall order, but we're not told outright why he came to that conclusion, nor do we know much of his motivations beyond the desire to surpass his father and prove the miracle. Instead, most of Zoraal Ja's deal, to call it something, is implied and requires careful observation of his interactions with others. There's more about Zoraal Ja that is unsaid compared to what is spoken out loud or even shown. To understand how Zoraal Ja got to where he ended up, there are several factors to consider. First, and pretty critical, is culture. It's one of the central themes of Dawntrail, exploring different cultures. In this case, it's Mamulja culture. In Mamuk, we saw how they worship the Blessed Siblings, and the entire society is geared towards their creation, and those that are born are put in positions of authority. But why do they worship them? Power. That's the main reason. That's why they became prominent in the first place, as they were born during a time of war where might makes right. And that tradition carries forward. It's why Bakul Jaja's laws created such a visceral reaction in his father. It was the antithesis of their entire point of view, that blessed siblings are the most powerful beings. Second, and on a related note, we also know that blessed siblings are 1 in 100, and they're supposed to be infertile. But Zoraal Ja was nothing if not a trendsetter, so he was the exception to the rule, and as such, he bore an offspring, an impossible child, a true medical miracle. How many times have you seen in modern media, be it fact or fiction, parents who were not supposed to be able to conceive do so anyway and declare their kid is a miracle? Same principle applies here. And yet, there's a third item. Zoraal Ja isn't just a miracle child. He's also a completely new kind of Mamulja, the perfect fusion of the traits of the two bloodlines running through his veins. The physical traits of one and the scales of the other, the true hybrid. Sure, it's just basic genetics, but for those on Tuliyollal, especially the Mamulja, he's an impossibility even greater than the blessed siblings, especially as it becomes apparent that Zoraal Ja carries much of the strength of his father, who's already one of the most powerful individuals in the continent, if not all of Etheirys. And it's unknown how powerful he could become in time. So combine his clear might and the uniqueness of his birth, and you can see how the Mamulja in Tuliyollal could see this child as someone to worship, as an existence beyond the blessed siblings, or at least that could be the perception. If blessed siblings became revered for their might, then it's pretty easy to see how Zoraal Ja could have ended up with the same kind of worship around him. The prime example of this reverential treatment is Zoraal Ja, aka Jafar Ja, the Jafar, or however you want to call him. He's a conniving bastard. But something that is abundantly clear is that his belief in Zoraal Ja's superiority and absolute claim to the throne is sincere. Not saying he's loyal, not by a mile, but he does believe in the superiority of the resilient son, to the point that while having his own machinations, he's pretty happy to remain submissive to the young prince and continue to work towards his coronation. Another example is, of course, Baby Yoda's creepy stalker mom, who pined in admiration for Zoraal Ja from afar, enamored with all that Zoraal Ja was, or the perception of what he was. It's worth noting that Jafar Ja was the palace seer, and one high up or trusted enough that he wrote the letter to Kryle's grandfather and had access to the vault where the key was, and even interacted with Zoraal Ja's inner circle. So we can easily make the claim of him being something like the head clerk in terms of the palace staff. And it's not too far-fetched to say his way of treating Zoraal Ja could have influenced others. First in the palace, those people immediately around the young prince, and then beyond. As a possible proof, let's take the cutscene after the start of the Rite of Succession. As they walk out, the prince and princess speak to the people. Those wanting to talk to Kona just approach him and state their case. They just talk to him. And Wuklamad is your friendly neighborhood princess. She's the one they invite to the cookout. They buy her tacos. She's incredibly approachable, just one of the people. Zoraal Ja is not. The person who approaches him, despite the desperate nature of his cause, stops in his tracks and then goes down on one knee to look up at Zoraal Ja, to plead for his aid. There's a clear difference in how they view Kona and Wuglamat and how Zoraal Ja is perceived. So with Zoraal Ja, creepy stalker Mom Ja, and this guy, we can see a pattern of behavior, and it's likely that this was the norm for Zoraal Ja, in the way everyone outside his family treated him, from the palace staff to the populace to even members of the Lance Guard, especially given his strength. After all, during that same Rite of Succession cutscene, when Zoraal Ja's walking out, you hear someone in the background going, "Oh my god, it's Master Zoraal Ja! It's Zoraal Ja-sama!" Which you don't hear anything like that with Wuklamad or even Kona. Plus, you see a guy calling him to Liolo's greatest warrior. And that's important because it would inform Zoraal Ja's obsessions and motivations. With everyone around him calling him the miracle, the resilient son, and the true heir, it's not crazy to think that Zoraal Ja became convinced that he was going to become the next king. And being given command of the Lance Guard, which used to be under Gulool Ja Ja's authority, probably didn't help matters. After all, in preparation for their ascension to the throne, it's not unusual for kings to give their heirs positions where they could learn to wield their power and start to cement some authority. Zoraal Ja, especially someone like Zoraal Ja in his ear, could see his new position as commander of the Lance Guard as the first step in Gulool Ja grooming him for the throne. If Zoraal Ja was convinced that he was the next in line, we could see how the right of succession would come as a big blow to him. It goes against his expectations and what he's been told by everyone but his family. Zoraal Ja says, "My dad left me with nothing, no throne, no title." So there's a sense of betrayal there. By the time we start the right of succession, Zoraal Ja is already starting to unravel, but there's still hope. He just has to prove the miracle, make it apparent that he's the only one fit to do it, that the mere notion that his adopted siblings and these funny little blessed siblings could rule is laughable, crazy even. Unfortunately, he doesn't understand that the whole purpose of the rite is to teach the children, to make them face their failings and in doing so, become better prospective rulers. If Zoraal Ja had a contrarian with him, or someone to speak truthfully to him, he could have got it. But Zoraal Ja wasn't going to tell him. And why would Zoraal Ja choose anyone else to be beside him? Zoraal Ja is the palace seer. Presumably, there was no one wiser that he could choose. So in the end, he had someone that, despite having his own machinations, behaved as a sycophant very much invested in getting Zoraal Ja on the throne, and who very much believed in his rightful claim. His absolute claim, really. So, in the end, Zoraal Ja lived in an echo chamber. Zoraal Ja went ahead with the rite, though he likely didn't understand the point of any of the labors. They were just there to waste his time. Menial chores that couldn't help him prove that superiority, except of course, trouncing the Yughui Elder. Valigarmanda escaping was the perfect chance, but he couldn't defeat it on his own, had to fight alongside his siblings and their allies, which is why at the end of the fight, he seems downcast and regrets that once again, he's not proving the miracle. And from his perspective, the miracle means fully surpassing his father, doing everything he couldn't do. That would mean defeating Valigarmanda on his own, soloing that trial. And the miracle is also the origin of his apparent goal as king. Gulool Ja united Tural, a continent at war, and he brought everybody into a new nation through diplomacy, barbecue, and a whole lot of whoop-ass. So if Daddy did a continent, the only way to top him is to do the world, and spread that whoop-ass far and wide, to get people in line and accomplish peace. The goal is ridiculous, and the whole thing of war to bring peace is a massively oversimplified perspective. But in his mind's eye, with his obsession of proving everything that's been said about him, it's perfect, and would cement his legacy as the superior child. It's why all the people using the Garleans as examples of why it's a bad idea just doesn't faze him. They're just Garleans. He's the resilient son. It's only natural that he'll do a better job. But then the losses happen. First, the Iron Chef match. But that was Zoraal Ja. He screwed up. So even with the L, Zoraal Ja didn't react too badly. After all, there was still a chance of bullying his siblings to get their stones, which at this point he was already open to. The Zoraal Ja we know in the Rite of Successions is so determined to prove himself that he has no issues screwing with or harming his siblings, which is what Cryle sees through her echo. But then the bad one happened. Zoraal Ja is convinced in his superiority. He's the resilient son, he's the true heir, he's a badass, so he doesn't need any help in fighting the Shade of Daddy, and gets his butt whooped. And this is the loss he can't take, because this one is on him. He's been weighed, he's been measured, and he's been found wanting. So he snaps and tries to take out the judge. Bad move, and he's out of the running. which shocked him to the core. But you see, the loss is not enough to end the obsession, and Zoraal Ja, for his own machinations, won't let that be the end either. So they pivot to taking the throne by force. But to do that, they need the Golden City and the power it supposedly holds, which leads him down the super fun slide of evil and the rest of the story. A good way to see the difference in Zoraal Ja before the Dome, before Alexandria, and after is with his arrogance. During the Rite of Succession, though he's infinitely confident in himself, his behavior is stoic, surly even. After all, he's dealing with the sting of that betrayal from his father, to put him through this ridiculous rite. But he's not overtly arrogant, he's not boastful, more acting as if his tremendous strength was just a matter of fact. And taking out Bakul Jaja with a single strike says more than any words ever could. But the Zoraal Ja we meet later just won't shut up about how superior or awesome he is. And that's because he spent 30 years stewing in his own juices. Granted, that painted a picture in my mind that sounds fairly disgusting, but you get my point. With no one around but himself and the creepy stalker, there's no one to keep his ego in check. In Tuliolo, his family likely was the balancing act, the things keeping him from acting out too much. Without them, he has 3 decades to spiral way out of control, to turn the miracle from an obsession to the only thing that truly matters, his only driving desire, and a sense of superiority from getting really out of control. 30 years of obsessions and plans upon plans and moves on moves to prove to 2 worlds just how impressive he is, how much he deserved the throne, especially compared to his clearly inferior siblings, made a Zoraal Ja that had no filters, no limits, no lines that he wouldn't cross. Kill a bunch of people in Tuliolo? Check. Easy. Give their souls to Speen? Check. Easy. Hell, her goal of eating everybody means world war, which aligns with the goal of uniting everybody through war. 2 goals, 1 soul-eating stone. Kill everybody in Alexandria to fuel his army and then himself? Why not? In for a penny, in for a pound of souls. Zoraal Ja, after 30 years, has no lines he wouldn't cross. Hell, he nearly choked his kid to death. But we'll get to the Mamulja plushie later. The separation from everything he knew also fed something else, his resentment. After all, he wouldn't have ended up in this position if his father had simply done the right thing and given him the throne. He was the superior son, the resilient son, the true heir. Everybody said so. Why would his father give him the Lance Guard if the throne wasn't the end goal? And how dare Wuklamat and Kona to compete with him? The thing that can stand above him, even standing by his side, is ridiculous. Which is why when he sees his father again, he feels overjoyed at the chance to kill him. Because he has to pay. And he convinced himself that unfortunately, Zoraal Ja had escaped his wrath. That he'd only find satisfaction in taking everything from his siblings. But hey, fate was throwing him a bone. My theory is that the Zoraal Ja that went into the Golden City would not have tried to kill Zoraal Ja, or would have fought him and then stopped himself short of doing actual permanent harm. The one that came out of the dome? No such qualms as we know. A lot has been said about Zoraal Ja and Zoraal Ja and the man's reactions when it comes to many things about his child. So of course, we gotta talk Baby Yoda. I won't say too much about the baby mama, or that she's a freak. No, in all seriousness, Tishalja worshipped Zoraal Ja and confused that aberration with romantic feelings. She wasn't really in love with Zoraal Ja, but the idea of him, the Zoraal Ja that existed in her head. The entire thing is pure delusion. So she made a deal with him and he complied. And I know a whole lot of people think Zoraal Ja has to be a clone, because there's no way Zoraal Ja will get it on with her. I disagree. I think he did, but it was very much going through the motions, as it were. The same way performing, quote-unquote, for an adult film star is simply another day in the office. No emotion, let's just get it done. And then the kid was born. Big surprise, huh? And this is the scene that I feel most people misunderstand. Some take it as him being shocked at a child being born, but his exact words are, his scales are blue. That's critical, because combined with his physical traits means that Zoraal Ja is the same kind of hybrid that Zoraal Ja is. And if that's true, he's no longer unique. He's no longer the miracle child. There are others like him now. And while that's just logic, in the face of Zoraal Ja's mad obsession, that's kind of a problem. Then the other part comes in. You're the father. And this is where Zoraal Ja goes off the deep end in this scene. But it's not rage. It's not surprise either. His reaction to being told he's the father is anxiety. The entire thing, the muttering, the stuttering, and just panting like mad is a panic attack at the notion of parenthood, given that fathers are a touchy subject for this guy. I can only imagine his thought process. He has a very negative association with fatherhood. In his eyes, his father is a liar, a betrayer, he wants to kill his dad. So now he has this kid. Does that make him a liar, a betrayer? Will the kid want to kill him too? I theorize that's why he says, I can't be ... Being a father in his mind would potentially make him like his father, and again, there's plenty of negativity in there. And if you think that's far-fetched, how many stories do you know of people who found out they were becoming fathers and then bolted? I think the same principle applies here, just not out of irresponsibility, more, I don't want to be like my dad and do the same thing to my kid. Not to mention that at this point he still hadn't proved the miracle. And that's why he tells the stalker lady to take the plushie away, get the kid away from him. But it's very much an out of sight, out of mind kind of thing. If he doesn't see him, he doesn't have to acknowledge him. He can just carry on with his plans, with his goal of proving the miracle. But then they do meet again, and he hears the name the kid's been given, Zoraal Ja. Not only is the tie to fatherhood there, which is complicated, but now the kid has the name of Zoraal Ja's father, doubling down on the negative feelings there. If you look carefully at the scene where they meet again, Zoraal Ja snaps and goes for the kid when he hears the name. It's the utterance of Zoraal Ja that sets him off. So now, add all of this together, and that means what Zoraal Ja tells Zoraal Ja when he's about to die is true. He was a lost man, not fit to be anything for anyone, least of all a father. And perhaps, and this is my theory, seeing it was the end, him giving Zoraal Ja his king's authority might be Zoraal Ja's own way of defying those negative associations he has with fatherhood, giving to his son what he thinks his father didn't offer him, the product of his blood, sweat, and tears, kingship. Now, despite this extensive analysis, or better said, just how much I've thought about this character over and over, almost like I'm trapped in a dome, obsessed, hiding from afar, like a creepy stalker Mamulja. There are narrative failings when it comes to Zoraal Ja. Chief among them is that we never get to meet the Zoraal Ja that was. When we first hear anything relating to him, it's from Wuk-Lamat stating he can't win because he's a warmonger. And in Dawntrail, he's very standoffish, not really a people person. He's about that goal, nothing else. In 7.1, Wuk-Lamat states that despite everything and what we may all think, Zoraal Ja was a good brother growing up. It would have been great if we had seen some of that, even if it was a vision in the Echo, which honestly was in a bit of short supply in Dawntrail. The Echo doesn't manifest that often for the Warrior of Light. In fact, Cryle has more Echo moments with Zoraal Ja than the player. It would have helped to see that decline, the change in Zoraal Ja with examples of who the man was, how he related to those around him. Maybe see some examples of that worship of the people calling him the true heir of something. Witness also the relationship with his family. It could have helped his tale. If we compare it to, say, Emmett Selk, we see a lot of Emmett before we meet him in Shadowbringers. And he's an Ascian, so we know what he's about before the expansion. Then that story helps flesh him out. show the bits of him that we can relate to, and the depths of his obsession. We don't have that much with Zoraal Ja, and it's a damn shame. Secondly, I feel there's not enough of Zoraal Ja in the second half, in the Alexandria arc. He appears at the start of the section and then at the tail end, when it would have been great to see him more as a prevalent threat, to contend with his forces more often. In Dawntrail, Zoraal Ja drops the gauntlet on Wuk-Lamat, and we head over to him, breaking through Vanguard, and then it all kinda stops. So much so that Zoraal Ja calls it out in the cutscene. You were supposed to come at me. Why are you wasting your time exploring around? If that was the writers poking fun at themselves, it didn't really land with me. I would have preferred for there to have been more overt antagonism against us from Zoraal Ja and his royal guard, who are very much mentioned, but beyond the final boss of Vanguard, we don't see any other members. This could have also then helped to endear the players to Sphene, if she is seen standing in the way of Zoraal Ja's goals, opening paths for us through the conflict, giving the group opportunities to rest. Then when you do reveal that she's the big bad, it would make her seem even more scheming and manipulative, and make you wonder how much of what she said is actually true, and how much was meant to make you lower your guard. Now, relating back to the first point, on the Zoraal Ja that was, I wish there could have been moments where we could see the extent of Zoraal Ja's might. Just how powerful was he? As much as I like Estinian, I would gladly replace his duel with Gulul Jaja for a duel of Zoraal Ja and his dad. See them sparring! After all, we're told that Zoraal Ja has never defeated Gulul Jaja before, but seeing that would have been so good, and give us a father-son bonding moment, or just some form of interaction between them. In the entirety of Dawntrail, there are no scenes of Zoraal Ja with his father before their fight to the death happens. Imagine if their sparring match ends with Zoraal Ja's first win. That could then inform his decision to fight alone against the Shade, because he thought he could take him, having beaten his dad before. And you know, showing a bit more of Zoraal Ja with his family could have explored the tense nature of their relationship given the existence of the right of succession. And that leads me to something I would have preferred in terms of the overall narrative for Dawntrail. More specifically, something I would have changed. And it's the fact that when we arrive, the right of succession is already starting. There could have been so much more potential to establish characters, motivations, and relationships, build a stronger foundation for Zoraal Ja as a character if we'd arrived before everyone knew the right of succession was even happening. If we could have seen Zoraal Ja's reaction to that discovery. I can only imagine him coming to the throne room at a summons from his father, that he has an announcement. Imagine him coming in thinking he's about to be named the Crown Prince, to call it something, the next in line, and instead, it's the blow of the right of succession. That would have been awesome. But as much as I would have liked it, that's simply not reality. And unlike Zoraal Ja, I can live with reality. Or can I? Because I have to admit, I've been thinking about this for a bit. Even as I refined this script, there was something nagging at me. And it's the fact that, honestly, Zoraal Ja shouldn't have been a villain in Dawntrail. At least not in the MSQ. Instead, the main story should have been used to establish him, to introduce all those aspects of family relationships, expectations, and the like of Zoraal Ja's role in the government and society. Same with Wuk-Lamat and Kona. Make them active participants in the conflict with Alexandria. Of course, you'd have to rejigger the story, but it wouldn't take that much. You could make the interdimensional fusion the cause for the changing weather patterns that caused the flooding in Kozamauka, the weakening of the seal of Valigarmanda, and all those things that happen as maybe signs that the Alexandrians are coming. Then you could end with Gulul Jaja realizing it's time to step down, and then leave the right of succession for the post-patch content, to start showing Zoraal Ja's descent into villainy, propping him up for being a major villain later on. Build towards the next big story. Hell, You could even end it with Zoraal Ja attempting a coup and ending the expansion in chains. Zoraal Ja, at this point, you should be aware, is a villain I quite like, and despite the missteps I believe were made in his handling, there is plenty there to explore and plenty of depth to enjoy. I think patch 7.1 marked the end of any story involving Zoraal Ja. I think we've seen the last of him. And it's a shame. 7.1 gave us a glimpse of his mental state, and Dawntrail needed a lot more of that. But there is still plenty of story left in Dawntrail, and that hopefully means opportunities to help the villains shine. Because if there's one thing that should not be underestimated, it's how much a story can hinge on how good the bad guy is.